A warm welcome and a very good evening to the August audience sitting at the Live Center, Nadiad, and across the 30 centers in the country watching the Saturday School in Urology. We extend a warm welcome. Saturday School in Urology is a novel, purely academic platform in the field of urology where experts share their clinical experience with the entire urology fraternity. It also helps in exchange of ideas and overall academic and skill upgradation in the field of urology. The second Saturday School in Urology, we are privileged to host it from Muljibai Patel Urological Hospital. We are really privileged, we are proud to host our second Saturday School after the successful first Saturday School in Urology program which we started at Agra. So we are thankful to Dr. Ravindra Sabnis, our moderator chairperson. We are thankful to respected Dr. Mahesh Desai and Dr. Kaushik Shah as our today's faculty and helping host the Saturday School in Urology. I invite our medical head of Alchem Urocare, Dr. Abhijit Trailokia, to welcome the faculties.
Thank you, Ankit. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ravindra Sabnis. He has done his MBBS, MS and MCH in Urology from LTMC Medical College and Hospital, Mumbai. Currently he is working as the Chairman and Head of the Urology Department, MPUH, NADIAR, and Honorary Secretary, Urology Society of India. The member of various academic bodies like World Endo-Urological Society, Society International Urology, Urological Society of India, and Indian Society of Organ Transplantation and IMA. More than 200 presentations in various zonal, national and international conference, more than 50 guest lectures, oration and in various zonal and national conferences. Visiting professor for Urology Department at Hamid Medical Corporation, Doha, Qatar, and Urology Department, Koirala Institute of Medical Sciences at Nepal. Faculty at various states, zonal and national and international conferences, reviewer of various journals like Journal of Urology, Journal of Endourology, British Journal of Urology, World Journal of Urology, and Indian Journal of Urology. Wrote many chapters in various textbooks like Principle and Practices of Urology, Difficult Cases in Endourology, and book on ureteric stents. So with this now I would like to call Dr. Ravindra Sabnis to take it ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Abhijit and the entire Alchem Urocare team for giving us this opportunity to host this second Saturday School of Urology web-based platform and the learning. Well, this particular concept is, as you saw, it's a very novel concept where the formal teaching is now becoming on the internet based. We had in the past the teaching and the learning in a classroom, and then the learning and understanding the subject by attending conferences. But now, of late, this particular platform has become very, very popular simply because it avoids a lot of hassles and it gives almost same benefit what it would give benefit when you are actually attending, traveling and then sitting in the classroom. So I must congratulate Alchem Urocare team for selecting this novel concept and taking the academics forward. Alchem, I must say, that is the company which has always remained on the forefront when it comes to academic. I know them personally very well, and they have not only taken part in the and helped the academics in the institutes at the city level, at the state level, zonal level, but also at the national level. When I was secretary in the USI, they themselves came forward and requested for various academic activities and participation voluntarily. So I must congratulate them for taking the interest in the academics of urology, and that is what is actually the future, that unless and until the companies are involved, the industry is involved in the academics will not go into the grassroots level where it is actually needed. And this platform is particularly useful because it can reach to every corner of the country. As you know from this session itself, there are 30 centers which are actually are registered, and now there is a live transmission going on, and these centers are spread across the country, right from the Srinagar to Trivandrum and as far east as Imphal and the Guwahati to Rajkot. So across the India there are 30 centers where the urologists have gathered, and they will be listening to the experts what they are saying. They will be taking part actively. They will be sending the questions, and at the end we will address the questions which are sent by them. So this is how we are going to go forward. Well, as you know that there are 3 lectures which are planned. Today's topic is actually a stone-based topic. 1 hour, of course, is very, very short to cover everything. But we have selected 3 major aspects in the stone management and in the stone-related topics, where the first talk will be by Dr. Kaushik Shah. Kaushik Shah is a consultant urologist based in Surat. He is a very senior urologist, and he has innovated a very, very innovative sheets which are patented for his name, and he has popularized that. Those sheets have become popular, at least in India, and a lot of people are using it. He has done a lot of work on various aspects of PCNL, and especially related to the sheets and the suction. So he is going to talk on the use of suction, why and how, especially when it comes to mini-perk. The second talk is going to be on the radiation hazards. As we know that we do a lot of PCNLs, we do a lot of ureteroscopy, and a lot of us are involved in the fluoroscopy. But quite often when we interact with the people who are doing high volume work related to the stone and using fluoroscopy, they are not much aware of the radiation hazards. And therefore it is important to understand as to what are the radiation hazards which are faced when you are doing the fluoroscopic work, especially PCNL and RIRS and ureteroscopy and things like that. And third, the talk is going to be a very, very important talk, is that as you know, PCNL is the surgery which involves a lot of complications, and one single reason why people are still hesitant to do PCNL and they are shifting and doing more and more RIRS is because of the potentiality of the complications of PCNL. Over a period of years, we have understood as to what are the reasons for these complications and how to overcome those complications. And a very important talk will be by Dr. Mahesh Desai, who does not need any introduction to the audience, at least in India, and of course does not require introduction to the international urology community. And he is going to talk on this risk reduction strategies, or how to reduce the complications of PCNL, as a thought talk. Lastly, after these 3 talks, 3 of us will take all the questions which will be sent by you. I encourage all of you from every center to send the questions. The moderators are here. They will compile all the questions, and all those questions we will take up at the end and try to give answer to each and every questions and doubts and queries which you have raised. So with this introduction, may I invite Dr. Kaushik Shah to come forward and give his talk on use of suction in mini PCNL, why and how. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I invite on behalf of Alchem for being present for the Saturday School in Urology. It's an excellent idea, and I congratulate them for giving me an opportunity to share my views. I also thank Muljibai Patel Yogical Hospital, Dr. Mahesh Bhai and Dr. Sabnis, who has constantly inspired me to do the work what I have done today, and I am sharing those work. Every one of us knows that mini-perk is a standard treatment for majority of the stone disease, primarily because it involves small tract size, there is a minimal dilatation required, there is a reduced chances of bleeding, there is a reduced hospitalization, more tubeless procedures are possible. But the suction is missing because of the small tract size. So far we used to avoid and work without suction, but now suction in mini PCNL is possible. Not only possible, it is very easy to use. Not only easy to use, but it comes at minimal cost and comes with an added advantages. This has become possible because the suction which was a part of the nephroscope has come as a part of the sheath system. And Shah Superbug sheath, which has developed by me, patented by me, is available in the size of 12, 15, 18, 21 and 24 French. Cleopatra is another option to use with a similar principle. Both are very effective way to suck the stone during and after the lithotripsy. When we thought of adding a suction, there were two ways. One is the suction as a part of the lithotripsy devices. In this case, where is the pointer? Okay. So in suction, when we use through the nephroscopic channel, it's a very small suction possible and very limited fragment can come out which of any significance. Whereas if you use sheath as a part of the suction, then the whole space by the side of the nephroscope can be used as a suction. Can you go back? Sorry. I had gone forward. Okay. So I'm not comfortable. Yeah. So what is happening that when we are using sheath as a suction tube, when the nephroscope is there, there is a significant space by the side of the nephroscope which can drain the fluid and fragments. And when we withdraw the nephroscope, the whole sheath works as a suction tube. So far in standard nephroscope, maximum size of suction was only 10 French. Now here the sheath size either 12, 15 or 18 becomes a suction tube. So what exactly is a saw sheath? It is like any standard employer sheath or a mini POC sheath. It comes with a dilator and there is a connector to attach. So to add suction in PCNL, all what we require is just replace the mini PCNL sheath with a saw sheath. That's all what you need to do. Nothing extra is required to do that. And almost all every OT has a suction unit in their center. It cannot work without it. So you don't need to spend anything extra. So the first way to use saw sheath, someone says that I don't want to use a suction. I want to work like any standard mini POC. So if you do not use a connector, this works exactly like a mini PCNL sheath or any standard employer sheath with an added advantage that you can control the sheath in a much better way. If you attach a tube, then it can drain the fluid very well and you don't need, you don't see that operative field is soaked with fluid and you don't need to collect the fragment as is done in mini PCNL. All the fragments and fluid goes into the suction bottle. Now in mini POC we need to go in and go out very frequently. So when you have attached the connector, you just need to withdraw the nephroscope up to the connector size and the fragment falls in the reservoir and comes out. So in and out movement of the nephroscope is very easy. So all these three different methods, and the fourth one, many times we need to distend the system to inspect different calyx. Sometimes some calyx is closed and we are not able to go into that calyx. If we close both the end, then the system can distend and you can inspect the calyces which otherwise were not seen. So, and that is very important when you are doing supine PCNL. So these are the different ways, even if you are not using a suction, is going to be a useful armamentarium when you are doing a mini POC. Now comes the real benefit. When you attach the suction tube and Even if you do not close the opening, suction control opening, there is a minimal suction continuously happening, and that can help a lot. And when you want a maximum suction, you just press that opening. I'll show you how. So this is a system setup. You put a multi-hole or a routine ureteric catheter in the upper calyx, put a shower sheet, attach a connector, put your nephroscope, start irrigation whatever you are using. You can use laser fiber or a pneumatic lithotripsy. Attach a suction tube which goes to the suction bottle, and whenever you want to use suction, you just have to close the air opening. Now on the suction side, we have come up with a small slow suction, because the routine OT suction is many times very powerful. So low suction can be a great help. And second thing is that we have come out with a bottle which has a tap. So when the bottle is filled up, you don't have to dismantle the whole assembly. Just open the tap and all the fluid that has accumulated in the bottle can be emptied. And we have come out with a small bottle which is a stone catcher bottle, where all the stone fragments. So at the end of a surgery, you don't need to collect any stone. That bottle will collect for you. Another important aspect which is neglected is a retrograde irrigation. If you want to use a suction like this, it is mandatory to use retrograde irrigation, primarily because when you are withdrawing the scope, you don't see what is happening at the other end of the sheet, and renal pelvic mucosa can be sucked when you are doing. So retrograde irrigation prevents the damage to the renal pelvic mucosa, and it avoids the minor bleeding that many urologists see from pelvic mucosa if they are not using a retrograde irrigation. The other advantage is that it has to push the fragments which are in other calyces come towards the sheet to be sucked, and that helps push and pull mechanism. So I request those who are using suction, add retrograde irrigation as a compulsory part. Now how to activate the suction during lithotripsy? Just close the opening, either can by assistant. So when we are doing a lithotripsy, patient, the assistant knows that yes, it is required. She just puts the finger, lifts up when it is not required. When we are withdrawing, again the assistant can do the job of putting suction, and the surgeon withdraws the nephroscope, and when it comes at the reservoir, surgeon comes to and the assistant holds up stops the suction. And the same thing can be done by surgeon himself. Himself can control, especially during withdrawal of the nephroscope, because his other hand is free. There is nothing to hold with the second hand. So I am showing you the video. In video there are two parts. One is a stone being seen endoscopic view, and one is a surface view. So if you notice, there is a nephroscope and we are using a pneumatic, and we are using a simple saw sheet attached to a suction unit. Now if you see that all the stone are fragmented, not dusted, if you use this pneumatic just like a contact laser and touch, then also the stones are going to be fragmented. When adequate fragments are there, if the assistant feels that yes, we need a suction, he or she immediately puts her finger on the suction control opening. See, she has come and she has started putting, and all the fragments that are there will be sucked out by the side with a maximum suction. He keeps repeating whenever it is required. When it is not required, just lift the finger and the suction is off. So on and off of the suction is at the fingertip control. Once adequate fragmentations are done, and once you think that there are a lot of fragments we want to withdraw, take out the lithotripsy probe and withdraw the nephroscope. See, we have taken out, and now the surgeon controls the suction and pulls out. Multiple fragments are coming out. Just withdraw up to the reservoir, so the in and out movement is very easy, and the other fragments are waiting to be sucked. We don't need to search for the stone. Stone fragments comes towards the sheet, and within 3-4 passes, almost all the fragments comes out, and you got a very clear field free of dust and fragments. Can you notice this? So this way, these three ways, you can completely understand how the suction is working and how the fragments can come out, and you can use pneumatic or a laser. So this is the laser. Now the beauty is that the flow of fluid does not push the stone away from you as occurs in stand-up. The stone is willing to come in the sheath, and whatever the fragments are there also is being sucked out very powerfully. If the stone is big, you can use a fragmentation or a dusting, and if you notice, all the fragments are coming to a snowstorm effect, which we normally see with a laser, is not seen because of the suction, and that improves or hastens the speed of lithotripsy. Many people are saying that whatever you have shown, we are already doing with the vacuum cleaner effect, and I don't think that suction is required. We are very comfortable. Just to remind them, the Dr. Negle, who has invented and popularized this, he himself says that it is best for 15 French sheath, and that too with a 12 French round tip nephroscope. In all other scenario, the effect is not that prominent. That is not happening with a suction when you are using with a sheath. It is not dependent on the sheath size or the type of nephroscope you are using. So you can use other companies' nephroscope without losing any advantages. It is effective even in hydronephrotic system, or where the pelvis is flabby and atonic or something like this, or in the dilated calyces, you can easily suck the stones. For bigger sheath size like 12 French, 18 French and 21 French, much bigger fragment can come out by the side of 12 French nephroscope, because the space is huge and the speed of fragmentation removal is high, and therefore you can finish the procedure much faster if you use 12 French nephroscope and 18 French sheath, if it is the biggest stone. And when we are withdrawing the nephroscope, multiple fragments can come out simultaneously rather than one by one. So that is a big advantage of using suction. So now, what are the scenarios in which you need to use the suction? At the beginning of a nephroscopy, when there are small clots at the initial nephroscopy, it can be sucked out and the vision becomes clear so that you can go ahead. If there are small stones in the calyces which you have punctured, all the small stones, fluid, debris, whatever is there is sucked out very powerfully, and then you can start segmenting the main stone. The stone which is fragmented comes closer to you, and therefore fragmentation becomes easy, and whatever fragments are there comes out very quickly, and that makes lithotripsy faster. You have noticed this in the previous videos which I have shown. I am repeating that, and therefore the fragmentation rather than dusting is possible, faster, and may be advisable in a very hard stone. So another advantage is that the fragmented stone do not migrate to the distant calyx, and migration can be prevented. And if you don't have to manipulate the nephroscope in different calyces to search for the stone, the bleeding which occurs because of the manipulation of the nephroscopes can be reduced significantly. Pneumatic lithotripsy can be used with an advantage in appropriate circumstances, and those centers who do not have a laser can use effectively pneumatic lithotripsy, and they can give benefits of mini-POC facility to their patients with an added advantage. If the system is infected, one can suck out all the debris, infected fluid, and within few minutes they can decide whether to continue or state the procedure, put a nephrostomy and come out. There are certain special situations where it is very important. When we are doing mini-POC and fragmenting the stone at the UPJ or in the upper ureter, the force of the nephroscope fluid pushes the stone down. Here in these circumstances, when you are working at upper ureter, stop the irrigation from the nephroscope, start the forceful retrograde irrigation from below, and start suction. So whichever the fragment is going down the ureter is pushed up by the irrigating fluid from below and pulled from up by suction, and you can see the system, and fragments will not go down the ureter, and it will make the procedure much easier, and the exit strategy can be tubeless. Otherwise we have to put a stent in those scenarios. Same situation can happen when you notice that the stone is migrating towards the infundibulum with a remote calyx. You can stop the irrigation, and the same maneuver can be done to prevent the migration. And many times we notice small perforations in the renal pelvis. In this scenario, we may be able to continue the procedure with a caution, with a suction, if it is a small perforation, to achieve complete clearance. So these are the circumstances in which it can be a great help. So let's compare mini PCNL sheet with SUB, because what is important here is just replace the sheet. So we are taking head-to-head comparison. 12, 15, 18 and 21 French, so all sizes are available. And the vacuum cleaner effect, which you notice is 15 French, is equal because it is related to the size of the sheath rather than anything else. So it is possible with this saw sheath also. It has a powerful suction. It is extremely light in weight, and there is a easier insertion because of the you can hold the sheath in a much better way. Stone collection is automatic. There is the ease of movement of the nephroscope. Practically there is minimal spillage of fluid in the OT, and everything is collected, and particularly in a winter season this is very important to prevent the hypothermia, and when you are taking the next cases you don't need to clean the OT to take the next case. The cost is much cheaper than the standard mini-box sheet. The quality is excellent, it is durable, and it is freely available. So dear friends, I invite you to think of a possibility of using saw sheath as a default renal sheath when you are doing the next PCNL. When I was doing my residency at JIPMER Pondicherry, there was an educational workshop on educational sciences, and the first slide was that education is a three-part process. One is gathering information, second is acquiring skill, and third is change in behavior. And they very empathetically said that unless there is a change in behavior, education is incomplete. I hope that we will have some change in behavior for the benefit of patients and everyone. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think there's a nice covering, nicely covered the topic of the use of suction during mini PCNL. Now we go on to the next topic, which is the radiation hazards in PCNL, what generally we ignore. Now, next. When we talk of a radiation in PCNL or any procedure where fluoroscopy is involved, the radiation actually is to the patient, to the urologist who is actually doing surgery, and of course to the surrounding staff who is assisting the main surgeon. These patients, when they are undergoing PCNL, for example, these patients have already undergone imaging study which also has involved a lot of radiation, and when you do a lot of imaging study, you have to understand that every imaging study, whether it is a plain X-ray KOB, whether it is a plain CT, whether it is CTI, whatever imaging study you do, there is certain radiation which is involved, and patient is taking that radiation dose to him. And if you do multiple imaging studies, especially in the patients who are recurrent stone formers, who have rapidly formed the stones, the procedures is long, big stones and things like that, this is the cumulative effect of radiation which can be really hazardous. You have to have major concerns, especially when you are ordering imaging studies in a pediatric population, recurrent stone formers, and of course if the patient is in a pregnant and a childbearing age, that has to be borne in mind that the married ladies childbearing age group, you need to understand what is the last period, when is the safe period to do this imaging studies and things like that. And therefore this ALARA principle has to be obeyed, has to be followed in almost every case. Now, very, very important that how to measure this radiation hazards and measure this radiation dose, which actually is not only the patient who is receiving, but the surgeons and the assistants who are receiving. So these are some of the units which are in use for calculating the radiation dose. Gray is the joules of radiation absorbed per kg tissue, which is what we measure when we are advising radiotherapy to the patient for various diseases. RADS is termed as a R. Sieverts now is considered to be a mainstay when we are actually measuring the radiation dose. Sieverts is defined as the effective dose absorbed depending on sensitivity of the tissue. Millisieverts is the 1000 sieverts, millisieverts is sieverts, and the Roentgen is the dose of radiation delivered. The difference is that why sievert is preferred is because it takes into consideration the radiation dose, not only the delivered, but it is what is absorbed. What we are interested in that, what is the dose absorbed, because absorbed radiation dose is going to have the deleterious effect, and therefore the sieverts measures the dose of the radiation which is absorbed. Now every tissue in the body is going to absorb in a different manner depending on the sensitivity of the tissues which are involved. Some tissues may not absorb much, some tissue may absorb more, some parts of the body may reflect the radiation dose. So in short, 1 gray is equivalent to 100 rads, 1 rad is equivalent to 0.01 sieverts, and that is equivalent to 10 millisieverts. 1 sievert is 10,000 millisieverts, and 1 millisievert is 1000 microsieverts. Sorry, 1 sievert is 1000 millisieverts. The dose or the radiation what we are going to measure is generally in the terms of millisieverts. So that is a very important unit for all of us to know. Now this is the very, very important slide where it actually gives, and it's a very eye opener, that how much radiation we are actually delivering when we are advising certain imaging study. If you advise X-ray chest, you have the radiation only 0.02 millisieverts. But as you keep on increasing the imaging studies, for example IVP will deliver 2.4 millisieverts, CT abdomen and pelvis will deliver 10 millisieverts, PCNL on an average size stone will cause 9 millisieverts radiation dose to the patient, and so on and so forth. So if you advise one CT abdomen and pelvis, it is like advising, or it is like doing 500 X-ray chest in a patient. So that much is the dose which is involved when you are advising CT abdomen and pelvis. And therefore, of late, there are a lot of restrictions, there are a lot of guidelines which have come, and they have stopped using the CT scan as a modality left, right and center, simply because you are going to have the huge amount of exposure of a radiation. Now, if you know that all of us get about 2 to 3 millisieverts radiation per year, which is a background radiation in the environment, because from the sunlight and various other things, every one of us are going to receive 2 to 3 millisieverts radiation dose per year, which is perfectly all right and nothing happens because of that. But over and above that, if you are going to advise all these things, your calculation is going to be completely different. Now, if you, why it is important to understand is that one time exposure of 10 millisieverts in a 45 years old male or 45 years old any person will increase his risk of developing cancer in lifetime by 0.02%. Now, this is what is statistically proved. Same exposure in a 25 years old person will increase the risk by 0.05, and therefore as age decreases, the lifetime risk of cancer of anything, it can be blood, it can be lymph nodes, it can whatever cancer, whatever organ, but these patients will definitely get increased risk of cancer as compared to the normal population. And therefore the same 10 millisieverts exposure in an infant, say for example less than 1 year of age, of doing one CT scan abdomen and pelvis, that is 10 millisieverts exposure, is going to have the lifetime risk significantly higher as compared to the other children who are not exposed to such dose of a cancer in his lifetime. So it is very, very important to understand when you are advising the CT scan in our children. Occupational exposure limited to 20 millisieverts in any given year and 50 millisieverts cumulated in 5 years. So that is what is the safe occupational exposure radiation which is allowed. Anything more than that is considered to be hazardous, and it is the health hazard as the occupational hazard. So what happens during the procedure? Standard PCNL, it is the, on an average, you get exposure of 9.2 millisieverts. Exposure is increased if the stone is big, operation time is more, obese patients and various other things. Exposure is more if there is a higher MA and higher KV which is used. Continuous exposure against the single shot exposure, collimation is not used. In ureteroscopy, average exposure of radiation is only 2 millisieverts, and approximately 100-second exposure will result into 0.9 millisievert exposure. So this is how the radiation exposure is for all of us. We have to understand that. Now, reducing the radiation in the CT, when it was known and it was found that CT scan is so dangerous and so hazardous, especially when we are doing repeated imaging studies every now and then, just for having the clearance we have to do CT scan and things like that, then cumulative exposure to the patient is extremely high, and this every investigation is going to increase his chances of having cancer in his rest of the life. And therefore there is focus on the low radiation CT scan machines. Now how you can reduce the radiation during CT scan? Moving the gantry very fast, more slices, more exposure. Therefore if you have multiple slices, the exposure definitely is more, and in the routine thing it is not required. For a normal CT scan we want to say, why you want such a high quality CT scan? Is not required because it is going to cost and it is going to have the radiation. 2.5 mm slice is advisable, which will pick up all significant calculi. Dose modulation software. Now this is now becoming the mandatory thing in most of the newer machines. The scout film is taken and the machinist adjusts the dose depending on thickness, body habitus and patient. And the low dose CT now has come into the picture, and many new machines are actually having a low dose CT scan. Radiation reduction strategies during PCNL. Shielding. Heavy metal is the commonest lead. Lead apron, thyroid shield, eyeglass, gloves have to be worn in. General protectors, lead ceiling, walls, everything has to be proper as led by the criteria. Lead thickness has to be 0.5 mm. Sometimes the aprons are torn. It is actually of no use if the aprons are torn, if there are cracks in the apron, and this will actually pass on whole radiation without any benefit. So lead thickness of 0.5 mm is required, which will actually reduce the radiation almost 95 to 99%. Lead gloves, lead apron, lead drapes can reduce by 70%, but all of us we know it is available, but it is cumbersome and therefore we don't use it. These are all personal protections which are required to be used, but we don't use it because it becomes really cumbersome to use it, and therefore we are exposing ourselves to a great risk. Lead shields around the table makes lot of difference. Emitter from the bottom is the hallmark. Now all machines are like that. It is banned now to have the radiation emitter from the top, and lower the image intensifier, better is the benefit. So radiation safety from the bottom and the top. If you see here, if the camera or the radiation emitter is on the top, you get lot of exposure to almost every part of the body, whereas if it comes from the below, just from top to below, it doesn't make any difference in what we are seeing the picture, but the radiation exposure to the person or to the main surgeon who is actually just near to the emitter gets reduced significantly. If you keep the image intensifier as near the patient as possible, the scatter is very, very less, and the radiation exposure to the person and to the staff is much, much less. Now, other radiation safety measures are that pulse fluoroscopy reduces the exposure and the radiation significantly. Now, if you collimate, whatever is field which is required, if you focus only on that, rest of the field you collimate, then the reduction in the exposure not only to the patient but to the surgeon and to the assistant and to the staff is significantly reduced. Last image hold, you get the idea, and that is one of the important way to reduce the radiation, and almost every CIAM now it is mandatory that you have this last image hold policy as a principle. Any radiopaque object in the field of radiation will significantly increase the radiation exposure, and therefore any metal such as needle holder or the towel clip or anything should not be there in the field. The radiopaque instruments will increase the dose significantly, and as far as possible do not put on the auto mode, because what will happen is that auto mode will automatically adjust the MA and KV, and that will increase the radiation exposure and therefore you manually do everything so that you reduce the radiation. So carbon fiber on the tabletop, X-ray tube under the table, scatter leakage of radiation is prevented by the tabletop. Last image hold, digital imaging, pulse fluoroscopy. Instead of continuous, you take frame by frame. Now if you take the 30 frames per second, our eye will consider is as a continuous image, because our eye cannot detect the frames which are moving in such a high speed, and therefore if you reduce the exposure instead of continuous to the 30 frames per second, or actually to 15 frames per second, the radiation exposure is reduced by 70%, and still what we see as an image is a continuous image, because our eye cannot differentiate continuous and more than 15 images per frame. So you can adjust the low dose as 15 frames per second without affecting your work, and manual mode rather than auto mode for MA and KV. So tricks for personnel: experienced fluoroscopist, exposure to the surgeon himself. If he operates the foot control, there is a significant reduction in the radiation, instead of a person telling him that you show this, because he is going to show the fluoroscopy as per his wish, which is always more. Few images as far as possible, and decrease the time of the radiation device. Minimum staff should remain in the present. Any person who is 12 feet away is going to get zero exposure, as good as the background exposure. So this is what is the overview of the radiation exposure, and what they have found is, especially for a high volume center, if you do 50 PCNLs per year, it is safe for the personnel. Radiation exposure to staff is very, very less, and that is what is the annual permissible limit. Anything more than that, if you are doing procedures, then obviously you have to do all these checkpoints to reduce the exposure what you are actually going to get. And why we are discussing all these things, this is just to give you the idea. 400 millisieverts exposure at one time locally to the eye will cause cataract. 1 to 5 sieverts will cause hair loss. 2 sieverts will cause redness to the skin similar to sunburn, and 10 sieverts at one time, there will be intestinal lining breakdown, bleeding, and skin disorders. So this is what is the radiation which will cause. Now long-term exposure, this was acute exposure. Long-term exposure, 1 sievert in short or a long period, cumulative dose is safe, and there is actually no side effects. 10 sieverts is safe, but there are increased chances of malignancy. So 10 sievert is just 1 CT scan. You understand that 1 CT IVP will have 10, this is 10 sieverts, sorry, not millisievert, this is 10 sieverts. So if you do multiple imaging, multiple procedures, this is what is going to get accumulated, and that is going to be the hazardous. 100 sieverts exposure will cause some changes which are actually irreversible, and 1000 sievert exposure in a short and a long time will definitely be the cause for the death in that particular person. So these are all radiation hazards, and when we are doing the fluoroscopic procedure, all of us have to understand, all of us have to know, and then having understood them, we have to act upon, so that it is not only important for the people who are in the operation theater, but it is for us, for our own safety, that over a period of time we are safe from the radiation exposure. Thank you. Now may I request Dr. Mahesh Desai to take the last talk, which is a very, very important talk as to how to prevent and how to reduce the complications in PCNL. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Savnis. Listening to your talk, no wonder I lost my hair. I have done more than 15,000 PCNL, and I did have a tumor in my kidney which I had undergone a partial nephrectomy, maybe because of radiation. But that's true, absolutely true, that radiation has a hazard, and Kaushik Shah, which is presented the paper on the suction effect, and he is also making the tube which is plastic, and the plastic would not have a scattered radiation. So that is going to be advantages to that. Regarding the CT scan hazard, I mean, without a CT scan or without IVP, we cannot nowadays do any stone surgery. But there is a trick that you ask the patient to drink about 2 liters of fluid in 1.5 hours time, and ask him to hold the urine, and then you do a CT, plain CT, and you will see the dilated collecting system, the ureter, and here, and you may not need to do a IVP so long as his collecting system is otherwise normal. So that is one of the thing which I wanted to add to your talk. But I'm going to talk about the risk reduction strategy in the PCNL. Well, you know, there is a risk reduction strategy can be used in every steps of PCNL. Complication associated with everything: access, tract dilatation, stone disintegration, because we know we need a stone-free status, exit strategy, peri or a post-operative complication. I try to cover few of them which are very, very important. Now we know that there are around the kidney, there are very important organs. When we do the access, and many of us are very pragmatical that I will go from the upper calyx because I can reach to all the collecting system and take out the stone. And there is always a risk when you do a supracostal puncture, especially it is 12th, 11th is little safe, but more than above that, it is a little dangerous. If you want to do the puncture, you do a midline from the 12th rib, you go laterally, and then you puncture. Otherwise, you are likely to puncture the pleura. The pleura reflects from the 10th rib laterally and goes to the midpoint of the 12th rib. And then if you are medial to that, you are likely to puncture the pleura. If you puncture the pleura, still is okay. You might get fluid into the pleural cavity. So at the end of the procedure, you do the fluoroscopy and look at the lungs. And if there is a fluid there, you can put a small tube. It can drain and it will be all right. If you have done a supracostal puncture, make sure that you drain. Don't do a tubeless procedure. Then drain the kidney. Otherwise, you develop a pleural effusion, like in this case. Now here you can see that if you, even if you go after the above the 12th rib, you are definitely going to go through the diaphragm. But the pleura you might be able to avoid. But if you go above the 10th and 11th rib, there is always a chance that you might. An ultrasound, as I am using ultrasound for puncture, you can see the movement of the lungs in the pleura, and you can see, if you are very careful, if you are going above the supracostal, and you can avoid and see. Here, if you can see, there is a pleural effusion. At the end of the procedure, you just put a tube and come out. So don't forget to do the fluoroscopy and of the chest at the end of the procedure and see that if there is no fluid, if you have done a supracostal puncture. Secondly, initially we didn't have a CT scan. We were doing the plain X-ray, and we used to do AP and lateral just to see the bowel gas, because we know that the colon, it overlaps the lower pole of the kidney, and sometimes the colon, the kidney is retrocolic, and then you may do the puncture. You will do fluoroscopy, you may not see the colon, and you can perforate the colon. So it is very important that you do that carefully. And if you are doing the ultrasound puncture, you will be able to diagnose the colonic gas, and then you would not be able to see the stone. You go a little laterally, posteriorly, and then you can puncture from there. But now the CT scan has made difference, because here you can see all the kidney very well, and you can see spleen on liver. If spleen is enlarged because of the malaria, you will be able to detect, and we can be careful, because injuring the spleen or liver, it could be very disastrous. Because what happens that you take a picture of CT scan in the supine position, and you do the procedure in prone position, and all the organ, including kidney, comes down, including liver and spleen. And sometimes if you are not very careful, if you are doing under the fluoroscope, you are likely to puncture the spleen or a liver, and can do it. And sometime you have this is a spleen which has been injured, and here is a gallbladder which was but punctured. If you puncture a gallbladder, you cannot just leave it. You have to go in and take out the gallbladder, otherwise you'll develop a peritonitis. And here the track is gone to the colon and gone to the kidney. So it is very important to know the perirenal anatomy, colon, spleen, liver, and the supracostal puncture, the lungs. Now all these places you are likely to injure. If you injure the colon, and if you are retroperitoneal, probably nothing much will happen. There will be little leakage of the feces around the tube. Then you can put a DJ stand and withdraw the tube into the colon, and then once it's settled down, you can take it out. But if your puncture is transperitoneal, then you will have all the signs, symptoms of peritonitis, and you go and clear it up. So that's regarding the perirenal anatomy. But most important, now you come to the kidney, and the kidney, when you do, is a potential life-threatening complication like bleeding, because the kidney is a highly vascular organ, and you must know how to puncture. And that's very important, because all the major vessels are medial. So central puncture is not proper. Avoid the central puncture. Peripherally, all the vessels are small, but peripheral vessels are end artery. So if you puncture any vessels, there's going to be little infarct in that. So you got to make sure where you puncture, and that is important. So avoid central puncture. This is the central puncture, you can see it, and then you should know the little anatomy. And here you can see that the main artery is branch into a segmental artery, and then the internal calyceal anterior or superior segmental artery, and all these segmental arteries are in the fat between the different calyces. They are anterior or posterior. So the cup of the calyx, which after that is all arcuate vessels, and they are very small vessels. They don't bleed. They don't causes a life-threatening bleeding at all. So most safe area to puncture is the cup of the calyx, as are shown in the this picture, that all the periphery on the laterally, you can see that there is no major vessel, and you see only the cups of the calyx, and then there you can puncture and you can get into collecting system. Another advantage is the cup, the calyx is attached to the kidney, so if you puncture, there is no extravasation. So if you do go by the side of the calyx, then there is an extravasation in the fat around it, and your collecting system will get narrow. Similarly, if you are punctured centrally, there is a good chance that it will extravasate, and your pelvis will be compressed, and there will be a small vision will be less, even if you are not injured the vessel, but more chances that you would injure the vessels and do it. But if you are in difficulty, you can always do the color Doppler. If you have ultrasound like I have, and then I can see and then puncture between the vessel, and you can avoid the different vessel. But even if you do not injure the artery, there is a good chance that you might injure the vein, because venous plexuses are 3 in layers, and as shown in the figure, and then it doesn't really matter, because if you have it's a low pressure system, and if you have a nephrostomy tube, it will tamponade. But sometimes you can see a perinephric hematoma, and that may be because of the venous branch on the capsule which you have punctured, and there may be some anastomotic. Now you know the basic renal anatomy, and you know you have to go to the cup of the calyx to do it. But most important, which cup will you go? Which calyx will you go? The most safest calyx is the posterior calyx, because the anterior calyx, you can injure any of the surrounding organs around the kidney. So anterior punctures are very, very precise, very few indications are there. But most safe puncture is the posterior calyx. From there, you can go all around the kidney if you have done a middle posterior or lower posterior calyx puncture. And here, there is a Sampaio's classification of collecting system, and that's every person who does PCNL must know and must identify how the calyx is, and then you select the proper calyx. So it is very, very important to select cases. Here on the left side, you see that the upper and the middle calyx, they are crossing each other, and there is a good chance that if you miss that calyx, there will be a through and through, and there is a likely that the blood vessel will be in between, and you might injure it. And this is the very nice photograph by Sampaio. He has made a model of the cadaveric collecting system, and you can see how many variations are there. and you must be able to see all the variation. That's why a plain CT or a CT IVU is important, because when the stone is there, from where you want to puncture, you must know, and you must select the calyx properly to do it. So for example, that's why CT can give you the idea how you can do. You can use a low dose CT so as to avoid the radiation to the patient. Here you can decide which is, you got a mark? Here is the entry calyx, and then you can decide which is your entry calyx and which is your, this is the primary tract which can clear the, this is the entry calyx which can clear the lower calyxal stone and the pelvic stone. Then from that you can go to upper calyx or a middle calyx, and there you can see whether you can be able to go there. So this calyx can be either favorable, unfavorable. Favorable means you from here you can go into this calyx or you can go into this calyx, and unfavorable is calyx from where you cannot go because there is a acute angle, or there is a narrow infundibulum, or because the large stone volume. In that case, unfavorable calyx, either you do a flexible uteroscopy and go, or you do a flexible nephroscope, or you do a second puncture and then clear. That would reduce the complication, because it is important to select, because if you try to go from here into this one, you are likely to tear this infundibulum. In that case, there could be a venous injury or it could be arterial injury. And here, you may go from the side. And here, if you go from the side, there is always a chance that you might injure the intersegmental vessel, or there may be extravasation. So this is not the correct one. Correct one is, see, Sampaio also did one study on a fresh cadaver, and he punctured the upper pole calyx, and he found that in 67% time he injured the interlobar vessel. Middle pole, 23% time injured the vessels. Inferior pole, he injured the 13% time. We did a study where there was a bleeding, where we have to do an angioembolization, and upper pole bleeding was in 11 cases, mid pole bleeding in 7 cases, lower pole was 17 cases, because majority of the puncture we were doing through the lower calyx. That's why number is more. But here, compared to the number we did in upper pole calyx, the bleeding was there. This is the division. Here we see the under ultrasound, we have punctured the calyx, which is seen dilated, we have punctured, but this is a wrong puncture. Putting a needle is no problem. You take it out and put it properly into the cup of the calyx. So putting a needle anywhere is no problem. Nothing is going to happen. But you must select, okay, this is a good puncture, and after that I will dilate the tract. But then you can puncture the calyx at the cup, and then you dilate, no problem. It will be all right. So this is the proper one, which you can. So even if you do, if there is no arterial bleeding, there is always a still chance of 8% chance of venous injury, because the veins are there at the periphery. So a ideal puncture will be developing a percutaneous tract that leads straight from the skin through a papilla and to the target calyx into a renal pelvis. This is the perfect puncture. The central puncture, which must be avoided, is a central and direct pelvic puncture are prone to a bleeding and a urinary extravasation. Or oblique puncture, where you do obliquely, hence there is a more chance of bleeding because you will injure the intersegmental vessels. So bleeding, still PCNL has incidence of 34%, requires a transfusion. Injury, now slowly over the experience, our transfusion rate initially was 24%, has dropped to 6%. Very often the patient is anemic, you may have to give it, but still it is a 6% chance that there is a blood transfusion is given, even after all this experience. The injury to the segmental or interlobar vessel during puncture or dilatation. Inadvertent puncture of the segmental and interlobar branch during the access and tract dilatation causes the morbidity to the patient, also reduces the vision of the operator. In some time with a patient who was already tracked, and we have gone and removed the stone, and the patient has a kidney failure, sometime what I do is I look at the tract which is matured, and I look at the bleeding, and I do the Bugbee fulguration of those tracts. That will reduce the chances of blood loss, and also it will cause less complication. Sometime what I do is do the posterior stitch, because the bleeding may be from the subcostal vessel or a superficial vessel, and then if you take a deep stitch and tie it up, the bleeding stops. But still, if it bleeds, you take a second stitch below your track, and then if you see here, I have taken the track and then pulled it up, the bleeding stopped. So you can take two stitch and you can stop the bleeding. Now here is the patient who has got a stone, and we removed the stone. This is a small hole in the collecting system. What I did, I put a small Fogarty catheter, blocked that hole, and then I withdrew the nephroscope, and then I use a flow seal to in the track. This is a patient who is on a anticoagulant and likely to bleed in the track. And but a small bleeding, sometimes it's difficult to control, and you can use a flow cell and then you can stop the bleeding. So this is one of the tricks whenever you are taking a high-risk patient with a kidney failure, or with a kidney failure, or with a on anticoagulant and a stone, and you want to do it. Now this is the patient who had a stone removed from the track, and then patient bled, and then when it was referred to us, we did a sonography. We could see the AV malformation, and here we immediately took him for the angiography. And here you can see there is a blush of the dye here, and here there was a vessels which are bleeding. It was in the line of your puncture, and we put a coil, and the bleeding stopped. And then we could save. So whenever you do a PCNL, you please make sure that there is a facility of angiography either in your hospital or nearby where we can control the bleeding. And here I have done IVP after the 6 months, and you can see the kidney function is normal. So blocking a small vessel does not harm the kidney, the function. And here I already talked about this, and here we have punctured the kidney, and then the blood comes out. So what will you do? Your blood coming out, there is no urine, and here when you are punctured, probably is one of the arcuate vessel which is bleeding, or you have gone through the calyx and punctured the intersegmental vessel. Best thing is not to select, and then take it out and then put it back again. So if you see on the first time, if you see blood coming out, do not accept that. And sometimes people have put a needle and the blood was coming out, but the guide wire went easily. When you can see the guide wire gone through the vein, into the renal vein, into the IVC, into the heart. So this kind of thing happened. So you got to be careful in where you're putting the needle. And again, I talked about these vessels. There was another 20-year female who undergone a stone from a lower calyxal puncture. It went to the pelvis, and then it went to the upper calyx to remove the stone. So there was probably a pressure on that infundibulum, and the patient was having a bleeding, but not any shock. He was just having a slow bleeding every day, and the patient had a DJ. So what we did a sonography. There was no AV malformation was obviously seen in this patient. So what we did a cystoscopy, removed the DJ stent, and we could see the blood is coming out of that ureteric opening. So what I did is, because the stent was there for a long time, so I did a Fogarty catheter, a little 1 or 2 cc, and then slowly pulled out the Fogarty down, because I wanted to empty the kidney with all the bleeding clots. And you can see how much clot is coming out. The moment whole clot removed, the bleeding stopped. This is like like a TURP. You have a clot retention, you clear the clot, and then you put a catheter, the whole thing, because this is a venous bleeding, and then it can be done. Sometimes there is a kinking point. You have anterior stone and you think it is in the posterior calyx. You try to puncture the posterior calyx, and then it is not, so you withdrew, and then you put into anterior calyx, you puncture the anterior calyx, and then you put a guide wire which is going into pelvis and into the lower ureter. But when you take out the needle, kidney again becomes straight. Very often you puncture the kidney moves, and here there is a angulation, and this angulation could be hazardous. Here we have tried to dilate. You try to push, it may kink. Then you might adjust the kink and then do the different direction, go into the that anterior calyx, put a ampullage sheath, so there is no more bleeding. You put your nephroscope here, and then once you put a nephroscope, and then you try to look into the collecting system, adjust it, you pull it down, and what happens? There's a torque on the kidney, and the whole kidney cortex can be sliced, and then you can develop a bleeding and here. So this is the wrong way of doing it. What you have to do it, that you have to bring in the line of the calyx a straight puncture, shortest puncture, and then there would not be any problem like that. So very often you are not very sure about the puncture. You can do a flexible ureteroscopy and then puncture. Make sure your puncture is to the papillae, and then you dilate. There is hardly any bleeding, and that is to the ureteroscope. Or you can use like a microperk. You use a needle with a telescope, which we do in laparoscopy sometime. Various needle with 2 mm of telescope. You can puncture and see that you have gone to the cup of the calyx, so that puncture is safe, and then all the procedures becomes less. Once you are done a puncture, you have to dilate the tract, and that's where the complications start. You must make sure that you dilate till the size of the infundibulum. If you do more, it will be tear and there will be bleeding. And here you can see that you can do a balloon dilatation. There is a chance that infundibulum will tear and there would be a bleeding. So it is very, very important. All this point, bleeding, perforation, callus tear, infundibulum tear, persistent bleed pain, all can be attributed to the size of the tract. And that's why solution was, we came out with the mini-perk. And this mini-perk was with a small telescope. And then you can use a laser or a lithoclast. Then the size started decreasing. And then came the microperk, which we designed long time back. And then we could use a laser or a lithoclast to do it. Then the mini-perk XS came. Then this was a basic instrument. Here the UMP, Ultra Mini-perk. And this is where you can have a jet of the fluid, and fragments can push back in a whirlpool effect. And this is a super perk, or Shah super perk, which you already talked about. And then nowadays there's a new energy has come, which is Olympus shock pulse. There's a different way of doing it. You have a mini perk like Dr. Shah. This is a Cleopatra, where you have a plastic sheath and a suction which can clear the stone. This is a stone, and here you can do a laser. Now, one of the things about the Shah's nephroscope is there is a suction, and against the irrigation, when you try to do a whirlpool effect and try to get the stone out, there is a good chance that the fluid will intravasate into the kidney, and sometimes very patient has lots of pain post-operatively. But what my observation is, Kaushik, is that in the suction there is not much of intravasation or outside the kidney there is any fluid. The patient, they have a less pain, and they usually after 3-4 hours they can then walk out. Now here we use a suction tube. You can hardly see, it's a plastic tube, and with the laser we have taken out the stone, and this is the fragments. You get a powder or a 1 to 3 millimeter fragment, and all this fragment can be sucked out to that tube, and this is the clarity here. So in the end, one thing I have not mentioned is infection. I think infection is one of the almost 20% of the people that have a fever after the first or second day, but nearly about 9 to 10% of the patient, they develop urine culture which is positive. And I think whenever you have an infection, you must do a urine culture, and then if you have an infection, give a course of antibiotic before, and then you do it. Or you can do a PCN and leave it and do it in 2 stage when you clear the infection, so that you don't have sometimes you can get into a septicemia, especially patient is a diabetic and he has got a poor function and he has got a large stone, and you have taken more time. So you got to make sure that you have all the precaution precaution to reduce the infection. I personally believe that you can recognize every complication which can come with the PCNL in that particular patient, and you can take care of that. If your technique is perfect, if you take care of the small details, you would not have any problem, and you can have a complete clearance of the stone in the shortest possible time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think after these three talks, we have a lot of questions which have come from the different parts, different centers which are been watching this. Since we have the time limit constraints, we will take some of those questions, and we will take the answers from the faculty. The first question is from Dr. Pratik Gupta from Jodhpur, and he's asking that how can we check effectivity of the lead aprons in OT, and when they should be discarded. Well, as you know that lead gowns, there are restrictions and there are guidelines how to check it. There should not be any cracks. There are methods and instruments to detect any crack. Even if there is just a simple crack, that lead gown is to be discarded. Now, how to store these aprons is very important. If you fold these aprons, they are going to get expired quite frequently. The cracks are bound to come in, and therefore it is better to hang them. And there are instruments, there are agencies who will check each and every lead gown, and you need to do that checking, say, every 6 months or every 1 year, whether there are any cracks and things are not. Provided you have maintained it properly, there should not be any problem. So that's the second question is from Dr. Gautam Chaudhary, and what he is asking is, other than lead protective aprons, which other aprons are available in market? The lead gowns are the standard lead gowns which are available, and as you know, as we saw in the lecture also, lead is very, very important to protect the radiation. It blocks almost 99% of radiation with just 0.5 mm thickness. So standard at present is lead gown, lead apron. There are no other aprons which are available in the market. The other question is from Madurai, Dr. Suresh, and what is the pressure to be kept for suction in piston? This is for Dr. Kaushik Shah. When you attach the suction, what pressure do you keep? Is there any measurement of a pressure for this suction?
Almost all suction machine has a pressure control valve, and there is a dial on which they measure the pressure. So it's a 0.02 megapascal is a pressure that you should keep.
So it is 0.02 megapascal is the pressure which you keep for the ideal suction effect to get in mini PCNL. The other question is from Imphal, Dr. Sekharjit. Up to what size stones fragments can be sucked out through your mini PCNL sheath? That is for you.
It depends on the size of the sheath. If it is a 15 French, almost 4.5 millimeter stone can be sucked out when we are withdrawing the nephroscope, because that is the size of the tube. So if you are using 18 French sheath, around 5 millimeter fragment can come out easily without doing anything. If you are using 18 French sheath and 12 French nephroscope, around 2-3 millimeter fragments can come out by the side of the nephroscope. So it depends on the size of the sheath which you are using, one, and second, whether the nephroscope is in situ or you have withdrawn the nephroscope.
The other question is that what about using ultrasonography for puncture and dilatation, where it is feasible to reduce? Yes, definitely the ultrasonography will definitely reduce the radiation exposure. In fact, there are papers from China which has come that completely fluoro-free PCNL, where not only puncture, dilatation, but even the checking is done, complete stone-free status is determined by the ultrasonography itself. And there are people who are practicing that, so it is completely fluoro-free PCNL. And your point is correct that if you do ultrasonography, for puncture and dilatation. The radiation is much reduced in the as exposure.
Can I come in here?
Yes.
Puncture you can do with the ultrasound, but if you are going to do the dilatation in ultrasound, you can do the dilatation, you can see the track, but you will not see how depth of that thing. For that you need a fluoroscopy. Otherwise, if you extend dilatation, there is a good chance that you might perforate the pelvis. In a fluoroscopy, you have a ureteric catheter. So your dilatation will go up to the ureteric catheter, not beyond. Otherwise, you are likely to develop a perforation.
So there is definitely a learning curve when you are doing completely the ultrasound guided PCNL, and none of us are at present doing completely ultrasound PCNL, but there are certain publications. The next question is, do you do CT scan in every patient before PCNL? This is for you.
Yes. I think it is very important to identify, because one thing you would like to know the exact volume of the stone. Volume, that is a cubic millimeter. One. Second thing, you would like to know the Hounsfield unit of the stone, so you can adjust your laser energy accordingly. And third thing is, you know the small stone, if the Hounsfield unit is low, uric acid stone, you may not be able to see the stone on a plain X-ray, and you will miss the stone. The CT will give you the proper. So proper for the size, the location, the number, and for the Hounsfield unit, you need a CT scan. But you can use a low dose CT, we can.
Next question is again from Impire. What is the role of air pyelogram, and how much air to be injected? Is it advisable? Anybody, do you have any experience of air pyelogram?
I regularly do air pyelogram, particularly with this multi-hole ureteric catheter. If you inject 2-3 cc of air, all the posterior calyxes will be filled with the air, and then you can use a regular contrast so that it can differentiate. And if you are noticing that whatever air you are putting in should be seen on the screen in the PC system. If you don't see, that means that something is wrong and you should not inject more air, and you change the plan of PCNL without using air.
The next question is that how is effective retrograde irrigation achieved with Shah sheath? So retrograde irrigation.
Retrograde irrigation, especially with a multi-hole ureteric catheter, is very effective because if you put the tip of the ureteric catheter in the upper calyx, and all the system right from the upper calyx, the renal pallice and the upper ureter are filled with the saline from below. Either you can push with the 50 ml syringe, or you can use the gravity when attaching it normal saline, and it flushes all the stones which are in the different calyces. Plus it is important that when you are withdrawing the scope, that irrigation will not allow the mucosa to be sucked. So it is very effective, and if you want to know how effective, if you push the fluid in, within no time it comes out also. That is a regular finding of a lot of people who are using multi-hole ureteric catheter, that it drains very well. If you are using single hole, it is not very effective.
But I think, Kaushik, more than your retrograde irrigation, your suction is more important in clearing the stone, and I think irrigation you need, but irrigation also comes to the telescope. But with retrograde irrigation, you just want to prevent any stone fragment going into the ureter. But suction is the one which pulls.
In fact, the retrograde irrigation is more for preventing the renal mucosal injury when we are withdrawing the scope, so that there is some fluid and the mucosa it's not. So it's very important for safety and very minimal use for fragment clearance. Thank you, sir.
Is there any difference in exposure based on the different brand X-ray units? Yes, definitely there is a difference in the exposure as per the brands. There are certain brands which actually are not following the international norms. There are certain brands which follow each and every international norm, and therefore if you select a proper branded fluoroscopy machine, especially nowadays the low dose digital fluoroscopy machines which are come, With that, the exposure or the to the radiation is far less, and therefore, if it is a brand which is following the international norms, it is definitely a better, good idea. The next question is that what is the standard? I think that we have already discussed what is the standard suction power. The next question is that the balloon dilator is meant to dilate the tract up to the nearest collecting system of the interest. There should be very few occasions to advance the balloon up to the infundibulum. So can you comment on that? That is for you. That when you are dilating the tract, how much advance you can take, especially from the calyx, if you want to go up to the pelvis?
I think
How much will you advance the...
no, the tip of the balloon must be in the pelvis, the knob. Then you can dilate the whole infundibulum and the calyx. The infundibulum is the only one which is little rigid compared to the rest of the calyx, because calyx can dilate. As you say, naturally also it can dilate. But infundibulum is the one which is little narrow. So your tip must be in the pelvis.
Do you want to dilate the infundibulum? Because if you dilate the infundibulum, it can also
Tear.
jeopardize
You can
the
tear. So I would that you should see the judgment on the
Judgment on
IVP.
the
So in that case, what you do, you could do a step dilatation.
Okay.
So advantage of mini perk is that you don't have to dilate with the balloon up to 30 French, or nowadays it's 26 French or something like that, because you can dilate up to the one step dilator and then you are inside.
There is a question from Dr. Wazir from Chennai, and what he's asking you is that how to detect colonic injury intraoperatively.
Yeah.
Can you suspect and can you detect?
Well, if you are doing, say, fluoroscopic guided puncture, then what you do actually is you first look at the stone and then come your fluoroscopic field outside to the skin and you look at the gas. So when you puncture, if your gas shadow moves, that means you are near the colon or you are going through the colon. So when you put a needle, the gas shadow should not move. That is one if you are doing through the fluoroscopy. You go little posterior. If you are doing with the ultrasound, because of gas, you would not see the kidney. So very often people don't see the kidney, they switch over to the fluoroscopy because they can see the stone and they can cause injury. So in a gas, the stone kidney would not be seen on ultrasound. So you go little posterior and then look at the kidney. When you can look at the kidney, there is no bowel. Now this will happen because we know the safest puncture is a lower calyx. And the safest, the lower hole is where the colon goes. And that colon, the kidney in a prone position drops, the lower pole drops anteriorly about 20 degrees. It can be retrocolic and then you can puncture and damage the thing. So long as you know this, we can prevent it.
The next question is that how many number of PCNL procedures per year are safe for urologic surgeon, and what is the basis of 50 PCNLs is a safe procedures? I think I was referring to the publication in which they have mentioned that a person who is doing 50 PCNL, if you consider the average exposure to PCNL, and if you do 50 PCNLs in a year, that will limit to the whatever is the allowable limit. However, this limit will vary from machine to machine, from person to person, and what kind of stones or what kind of procedure you are doing. As we saw that some procedure may not actually, you will not get that much exposure, which is average to be 9 millisieverts per procedure, but it can be less, and there are some procedures where it is a staghorn stone, multiple puncture, complex stones, multiple stage, in which the exposure would be more. So in that publication, what they have done is that they have calculated on an average a standard PCNL, how much exposure you are going to get. So that is what is the scientific basis. However, this is not a hard and fast rule. It could vary, it could be less or it could be more. So that is what is the exposure which you are going to get. I think there are many more questions.
We do about 750 stone cases per year. And out of that, 470 is a PCNL. One is whatever exactly you said, how you prevent. That is most important, because it is not worth having a cancer or any exposure thing. Thing is, we have a more team. So per team, if you see, we have about 6-7 people, plus we have a resident who are doing it. So it gets divided among the things. So, but still, the staff, other people in the theater likely to develop. So you got to be very careful, especially the female nurses who are pregnant, who are likely to be pregnant. Everybody must come with the gown. I think that is that discipline you must develop to protect yourself.
Well, I think there are many more questions, but now the time is going up. So I must once again thank the whole Alkem team for organizing.
We'll answer them by mail.
So organizing this particular program, and from the questions what we are getting, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm which is developed among the people who have been watching from different centers. So I once again hand over mic to the Alkem team and request you to summarize the whole program.
Yeah, sincere thanks to all the audience for their valuable time. First of all, our deepest thanks to Muljibai Patel Urology Hospital, Dr. Ravindra Sabnis, our moderator, chairperson, respected Dr. Mahesh Desai sir, and Dr. Kaushik Shah for their, I mean, it was a fantastic discussion, and we have got huge response from the 30 plus centers which we have participated. So a sincere thanks for addressing their queries for this wonderful discussion, and I'm sure it will help the entire urology fraternity for better patient management in managing stone disorders. I sincerely also thank the management of the MPUH. Dr. Ganatra has been very supportive. Even Kalpesh Bhai has been very supportive in making this program smooth and glitch free. We also thank our all the urologists who have been participating at the 30 plus centers. Plus, also there are many urologists who are watching it on their mobiles, on their laptops across the country. Sincere thanks, and we'll come again and again with such academic feast by various experts across different fields. We thank you for our hospitality centers across the 30 plus centers. Our webcast partner Banyan Tree Communications for a very smooth glitch-free transmission, and last but not the least, my entire sales team who have put in their efforts. And I believe, I mean, I'm just looking at the numbers. Approximately 60 doctors are present at Calcutta, 25 at Delhi, another 25 at Chennai, and so on and so forth. So we'll come back with the exact data about the audience, and we sincerely thank and appreciate the time by all the urologists in watching this program. It is a purely academic initiative, and we look forward for your support and continuing this forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. With this,
I request Dr. Abhijit to felicitate our faculties for their time today and their efforts. Yeah, may the knowledge in the urology grow the way these plants are there. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
yeah, we close the webcast for today. Thank you so much.